It means a great deal. It really does. Joanna and Noah and I loved writing the case. We loved teaching it. We were fascinated by the whole experiment of radical decentralization at Zappos. But it's a real treat to know that other professors and their students have found it valuable to spend time discussing the case. You see, at the end of the day, at INSEAD we aspire to be at the cutting edge of management education, and producing materials that people in other institutions, professors, students, instructors, find useful. It's part of that. So it's both a great recognition and a motivation to go on. You know, people often say that cases suit learning about management because in management you often encounter situations where there are no right answers, where there's only choices, and therefore you should be able to articulate your choices intelligently and compellingly, which is really a polite way of saying that in management actually there are smart answers and stupid answers, and you should be able to give a smart answer if you want to be a good manager. And honestly, I think that's not quite it. I think that's not really true. I think the issue that managers often encounter in their work is there are situations in which there are maybe 2 or 3 right answers, 2 or 3 potential avenues, potential courses of action, which could be defended with solid arguments and good data. And then you have to be able to debate with your colleagues, with your team, which of those or which combination of those is right for you at this particular moment in this particular organization. And that's what I think cases are particularly useful for. They train you to have that debate. If they're good cases and if they're well taught, they train you to participate in a pluralistic debate where an issue gets explored in more depth, including the principles underpinning it, the data you have at hand, and considering the context in which that decision is going to be made. I mean, a case is ultimately a story, and any story is successful because it touches people, because it has a protagonist which is fascinating and maybe slightly tormented, and because that protagonist is facing an issue that others could imagine themselves facing. And I think Zappos touches on issues that are very relevant to the contemporary workplace. For example, this idea that we should bring our whole selves to work. It sounds amazing in principle, but what are the pitfalls? What are the downsides? I mean, it's wonderful if you love your job, but what if your job doesn't love you back? What happens then? And then this other idea, I think, which is central to the case, that management is often a burden and leadership is the solution to all of an organization's issues. So what you have is a leader that suddenly decides to get rid of all the managers, and that often gives students pause. I mean, what might be the risk of doing that? What might be gained with that degree of freedom, but also what might be lost having to carry that amount of responsibility? And so I think it brings those issues to the fore, and it allows people to debate them. I look for a timeless backbone and a contemporary dress. I think a case works well when it touches on issues that transcend that particular context, that everyone could imagine having to face at work one day or other. At the same time, I think it works well when it allows people to explore how that particular idea or how that particular issue or that particular decision plays out in a particular place, in a particular context. And see, and this goes back to why are cases valuable? They're valuable because they allow you to consider how theories and principles apply in practice and in context, because in the end theory is wonderful, but we all have to live in a body and in a place, and those are never so clear cut. So cases allow you to have a peek at what happens when the rubber of principle meets the road of practice. I love a combination of both. I enjoy teaching my cases. I love teaching others' cases. I think that there's a difference though. When you teach other colleagues' case, you learn a lot about the protagonist, you learn a lot about your students' opinions, you often learn a lot about the brilliance of your colleagues who wrote the case in a way that really generates a fascinating discussion. But when you teach your own cases, you also learn a lot about yourself. There's always a point in the class after you've written the cases and redrafted and thought about it, where you're there standing in front of the students and discussion is taking a turn that you hadn't expected, and you realize, oh, that's touching me in a place that I hadn't thought it would. And then of course you realize that that story isn't just an interesting story, but it's also a personal story. And that's also, I think, the value of writing and teaching cases, that they remind us that management, in the end, in the same way as teaching, is always personal. And hopefully, in the best day, it remains personal without being all about you.